Here is a text message I got last week from a landlord. I need to sell my property and just give the tenant 60 days notice. I think we're good to go. They are not ready to go. If you do that, you could be facing a fine, a lawsuit, and a blown sale. If you're a landlord in Ontario thinking about selling a tenant-occupied property, you need to understand the rules before you play the game, because the Residential Tenancies Act, also known as the RTA, isn't a suggestion. It is now the law in Ontario. I'm Justine Woolcott, broker with Woolcott Real Estate, and today we are breaking down everything you need to know about selling a rental property in Ontario when you have tenants in place. We are talking about what you're legally allowed to do, what you absolutely cannot do, how to navigate N12 and N11 notices, and the smartest strategies to actually get your property sold. And one of the most common mistakes that tend to cost landlords thousands. Because whether you've got a tenant on an annual lease, a month-to-month, or you're thinking about buying a tenant property, this video will save you time, money, and legal headaches. Let's get into it. One of the biggest misconceptions that landlords have is that they think that if they want to sell their rental property, they can just give the tenant notice to leave. And that is wrong. It's a recent wrong, but it's wrong. So under Ontario's Residential Tenancies Act, selling a property does not give you the automatic right to evict a tenant. So let me say that again. You cannot evict someone simply because you want to sell. Here's what happens when you want to sell a tenant-occupied property. The existing lease will transfer to the new owner. That buyer literally steps into your shoes as a landlord. All terms of the lease, rent amount, duration rules have to stay exactly the same. So if your tenant has 8 months left on their lease, the new owner has to honor it. If they're month to month, the new owner assumes that tenancy. This is what is called a security of tenure for your tenants. It means that they have the legal right to stay in the home even after it's sold. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't ways to end a tenancy as part of a sale, but they are specific and regulated, and you gotta follow them by the letter or you could be in serious trouble with the LTB, also known as the Landlord Tenant Board. So here's how to do things the right way. First, we have what is called when the new owner needs the property for personal use. This is the most common way that tenancies end during a sale. So there's something called an N12 notice. It's a standard form in Ontario that says the new owner or their immediate family wants to move into the property for their own use. And here's how it works. You can use it personally for your spouse or for your parent or child if you are the person purchasing the property. You can't do it for a sibling, and it has to be an immediate family member. So no cousins, no aunts and uncles. It can only apply if a tenant is on a month-to-month tenancy. If they're still within a fixed term lease, so 12 months, you have to wait until the lease expires and they go month to month. With this, it is a minimum of 60 days from the beginning of the next rental cycle. Okay, so it's got to follow the 60 days notice. And here's something that a lot of people forget about is that you got to pay the tenant 1 month's rent, for the inconvenience of moving them. And here's where a lot of people get themselves into trouble because the buyer has to sign a declaration confirming they actually intend to live in the property. If they serve an N12, take possession, don't move in, and rent it to someone else, that is what is called a bad faith eviction. And the Landlord Tenant Board looks at this negatively with very brutal penalties. The tenant can come after you. They can sue for moving costs, rent differences in their new place, and damages. The LTB can impose fines up to $25,000. Here's what's really important to note. If you are a buyer and you purchase a home with the tenant, you serve an N12, you move in, you must occupy that property for at least 12 months before you can rent or sell it. So if you are planning to use an N12 as part of your sale, make sure that you're absolutely moving in for real. So let's talk about the other option, the N11 form. This, at its core, it's a mutual agreement to end the tenancy. It's often what we call cash for keys. Here's the difference between an N11 and an N12. With an N12, the buyer is forcing the tenant out legally because they need the home for their own personal use or for somebody who's an immediate relation. With an N11, you're negotiating with the tenant to voluntarily leave, but usually there's an exchange for money. So when do we use this, or when is this common? It's when you want to list the property vacant to attract more buyers. It is really, really tough to sell a property when there are tenants in there. There's another option, which is when the buyer actually wants certainty that the tenant will move out on the closing date. This happens a lot when you're dealing with a long-term tenant who's paying below market rent. You want to make sure that they're actually going to move out on possession day. But here's the thing some people forget about N11s is you have to negotiate. Tenants aren't required to sign and you can't force their hand. But if they do sign, they are often asking for compensation that reflects the reality they're facing. And some of the things are their moving costs. They have to have first and last month's rent somewhere new. The fact that they're likely going to be paying more for a smaller place in today's market. Now, before COVID, cash for keys deals were around, and it was about 2 to 3 months rent. Today, we're seeing, 6 to 12 months, tens of thousands of dollars, and sometimes more if the tenant's been there for years and the unit is significantly under market rent. Because as you may know, in Ontario, we are capped for properties under rent control, and you can only increase by what the province allows each year. Some landlords balk at this. They think, why should I pay the tenant to leave? This is my house, I own it, they should be able to get out. But here's why. If you don't get that N11 sign and that buyer needs vacant possession, your sale can fall through on closing. And we've seen it happen. The cost of a failed sale is way more often than just paying the tenant to leave. You've got more carrying costs, lost opportunity. The market shifts. So let's talk about your rights versus their rights. Once you've decided to list the property, the tenant's still in it. What are your rights when it comes to showings? You can enter the property for showings or your agent, but you must provide 24 hours written notice. And that notice needs to specify exactly the reason for entry, and that would be showing prospective buyers. The date, it needs to be a time between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. And it's really important to note that the tenant doesn't have to leave during showings. They can be home, they can be there. So it's really important to have a great relationship with your tenant so that they don't sour any showings. And here's something that is equally important. They cannot refuse entry or make the property unavailable if you've given proper notice. If a tenant repeatedly blocks showings despite proper notice, that's a breach of the lease, and you can go the opposite way. You can pursue eviction through the landlord and tenant board. So what about photos for the listing? Same rule, 24 hours written notice. Now, I would always recommend having a chat with the tenant to make sure that they remove personal items they don't want photographed, but you, as the landlord, have the legal right to take those photos. Now, here's what the tenants don't have to do. They don't have to stage the property. They don't have to do deep clean beyond normal maintenance. And they don't have to schedule their life around your showing times. Remember, as long as you give that proper notice, you can show between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., whether the tenant is home or not. So let me walk you through the mistakes that I see landlords make over and over again. Mistake number 1, lying. Lying to the tenant about why they need to leave. Some landlords will claim they're moving in, serve the N12, and then immediately flip the property or re-rent it at a higher rate. This is illegal. And it's not a question of if the tenant finds out, it is when, because they will watch it. They can sue and they will win. Another one is not understanding lease versus month to month. It's really important to note you cannot serve an N12 while the tenant is still in that fixed term lease. You have got to wait until it expires and they go month to month. A lot of landlords don't realize this and serve notices too early, which delays everything. Now, you can serve an N11 and sign an N11 as long as both parties agree to it. Another mistake is skipping the compensation with an N12. So remember, if you're using an N12, you must also pay 1 month's rent. Not a we'll work it out, not talk to the new owner. You, the landlord, have to pay it. Okay, the 4th mistake we see is agents putting clauses in the agreement of purchase sale without understanding them when they're dealing with a tenanted property for sale. Some listing agents will add a clause like subject to vacant possession without explaining that this means that the seller has to successfully remove the tenant. So the tenant disputes the N12 or won't sign an N11 and takes it to the LTB. That can take months, and months are often longer than your closing date. So if the closing date comes and the tenant's still there, that deal can collapse. And finally, assuming the tenant will just cooperate. Yes, there are lots of wonderful, great tenants. I've had them, I've worked with them, and they are lovely. But it's really important to realize that tenants have rights. This is their home. They have strong rights, and if they feel like they're being pushed out unfairly, they will fight. Which is why communication and being transparent, telling the truth, it's not just the law, it's good business. So, what is the smartest way to sell a tenanted property in Ontario? Your best option, cleanest option, sell to an investor who wants to keep the tenant. If your tenant is paying market rate and has been low maintenance, pays the rent on time, super easy to market the property as an income generating asset. There are plenty of investors who want a trustworthy tenant in place. Your second option, list with the tenant in place. N12 contingent on closing. You can add a clause into your APS with the potential buyer that says the seller will serve an N12 notice if the buyer intends to occupy the property personally. That buyer then will sign a declaration, you serve the notice, and that tenant gets 60 days plus compensation. Nice and clean. Now, really important to make sure that your buyer is actually moving in personally, because the tenant can dispute it. And then you have negotiating an N11 before listing. So if you know you want to sell the property vacant, approach that tenant as early as you can. Be fair and offer real compensation. Yes, I know a lot of landlords hate paying money up front, but what it can guarantee you is certainty, a faster sale, and no risk of the deal falling apart. And your final option, waiting for your tenant's lease to end. If it's coming to an end soon and you know they're moving out, you can time your listing to coincide with their move-out date. This avoids the need for any notices and any extra compensation at all. So, the lesson here, there is no one-size-fits-all approach, but the landlords who get the best results are the ones who understand the law, communicate clearly, work with a knowledgeable realtor who knows all about the LTB and the rules with tenanted properties. So, let's flip to the other side. If you are buying a tenanted property, quick note for buyers, here's some things you need to know. The lease transfers to you. You inherit the tenant, the rent amount, all the terms. You can't change them, you can't kick the tenant out. If you want them gone, you need a valid reason under the RTA, and that's gonna be your N12 for personal use. And make sure you ask the seller for everything in terms of disclosure. You want a copy of the lease, proof of the rent deposit, any history what they have with the LTB or disputes. You know, put an N11 as a condition of sale, because if you absolutely need that vacant possession, you can make it a condition that the seller negotiates that before closing. And if the seller is serving an N12 on your behalf, make sure you're actually planning to live there. Because if you're not, and the tenant finds out, you could be in big trouble. So, look, selling a tenant property in Ontario, it doesn't have to be complicated, but it does require knowledge, patience, a plan. If you're a landlord thinking about selling or a buyer considering a tenanted property, we can help you navigate this the right way. At Woolcott Real Estate, we've handled hundreds of tenanted sales, and we actually have a leasing specialist on our team. We know the laws, we know the forms, we know how to protect you and stay on the right side of the RTA. Have any questions? Reach out with the link below or drop your questions in the comments. And if you found this helpful, do me a favor, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share with any landlords or investors who need to see it.